Join us as we begin an interview with Shane Hamstra and author Dwayne Anderson with the diagram Driven by Fear or Led by Love.
So today I have with me your diagram that you put together, Driven by Fear and Led by Love. And I'd love for you to explain it. I'll have you first go over the, I'm assuming it's the theme verse for this diagram, 2 Timothy 1:7.
Yes, and it'll show up also under point 4. But here it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear." In other words, this is why we don't want to be driven by fear. We want to be led by love, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Because when we're driven by fear, that's when we see that we experience the results of sin. And we see that beginning right back in the book of Genesis. In chapters 1 and 2, we have no sin. When we get to chapter 3, it says, beginning in verse 7, after Adam and Eve have eaten of the fruit, it says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened. They knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, 'Where are you?' So he said, 'I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked and I hid myself.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?' Then the man said, 'The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate.' And the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?' The woman said, 'The serpent deceived me and I ate.'" And so we see that this is when sin entered into the world. And once sin entered into the world, we're going to be driven by fear unless we see that our trust is in the Lord. And that's why it tells us, as we said in that God has not given us the spirit of fear. So fear, it has its source in Satan. And we see actually, as we look at these verses 7 through 13, 5 consequences of sins that everybody commits. In verse 7, it says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened. They knew that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings." Now, who are they hiding from? The giraffes, the zebras, or are they hiding from God? I think it's pretty obvious. There's only one there they can be hiding from. It really doesn't matter about the giraffes and the zebras. And so we see that man, when man has sinned, he's separated from God. And then we also see that as that happens, then he tries to cover it up. And we see that Adam and Eve, they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So we have the separation from God. Then we have 3 other things. It says, "I was afraid and I hid myself because I was naked." We have fear, guilt, and shame. And so now we have 4 things that everybody experiences. And then as we go on, it says, "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, 'Where are you?' So he said, 'I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked and I hid myself.' But is he going to take the blame for it? No way. And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?' Now, Adam had named his wife Eve for a particular reason if we go back to chapter 2. But here we suddenly see it's like he forgot her name. And so he says, 'The woman that you gave me.' Well, there we see the 5th thing, blame. So here we have 5 things. Separation from God, fear, guilt, shame within, and blame of others. And so when we have fear, it's actually the result of Adam's sin clear back in the garden. We also see that over in the New Testament, we see that it also explains some further details about that. As we come to Romans chapter 3, we see that it tells us in Romans 3:18, it says, "There is no fear of God before their eyes." So we see that now it's not God they're fearing people, and instead of fearing God, because they do have fear, but they have no fear of God. And in verses 19 and 20, we see that it says, "Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." Now we see a very key thing here. We see that man creates a law. And if he doesn't create a law, we've got God's law. If we focus on the law, we can never get rid of sin. We're all guilty before God. Thankfully, we don't have to stay under the law, but if we focus on it when we're under it, Galatians chapter 3, verses 24 and 25 says, "Therefore the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor." And so we see a very key thing here. We're serving God. If we're serving out of fear, then we're putting ourselves back underneath the law. And here we see that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And as we serve out of fear, instead, we're driven by fear instead of being led by love.
Thanks for joining us as we looked at what happens when we are driven by fear in the diagram Driven by Fear or Led by Love by Dwayne Anderson. Be sure to join us for the next video on this diagram, focusing on what happens when we are led by the love of Christ.